Welcome, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me well. I'd like to thank you all for coming again tonight to the third, excuse me, of our annual transition events for elementary and middle school audiences. We're very excited to have you back and equally as excited to see some new participants in the room. My name is Clem Castellano, and I'm an educational specialist for career and transition services. At this time, I'd like to mention if you require a Spanish interpreter, please click on the link in the chat. And I'd also like to invite one of our Spanish interpreters to share this information with our guests.
Por favor, a todas las personas que quisieran tener la sesión en español, si ustedes podrían, por favor, hacer un clic en el link que vamos a enviar en el chat para el cuarto de español. Gracias.
Thank you so much. Okay, so before we get started, I just want to go over our reminders real quick. This presentation is being recorded. Please use Google Chrome as your browser for optimal performance. Audio and video capabilities are turned off for participants. However, you may privately chat with moderators. And webinar recordings and evaluations will be emailed to you later this week. Okay, and forgive me for not moving the slide forward. There we go. Okay, so as you can see, we have another full agenda for tonight. For our first hour, we have the owner and creator of Bass Educational Services, who will present on understanding the college planning process and learning how to find colleges and programs with the right support and services for your child or student. After Miss Bass's presentation, we're going to have the first of our two panels hosted by Sharon Denisar and Maggie Contreras. And that's it. So I'm going to stop talking now because I want you to hear what Miss Bass has to share with us tonight. Miss Bass, I am turning over the mic and control of the slideshow to you.
Thank you very much. Here we are. Welcome, everyone. My name is Judy Bass, and as you heard, I'm from Bass Educational Services. I am an educational consultant, and I help students find colleges and other post-secondary options after they graduate from high school. So what I hope to do today is give you an overview of what's out there and how to view some of these options for your child or for your student. And if you would please put any questions in the chat. I'm going to leave about a 15-minute at the end of the session for questions, and hopefully we can get to them all. And if we don't get to your questions, I can look at them afterwards. If you want to put in your email, I can respond later. So let's get started. And oops. Do it from here. There we go. So tonight we're going to talk about how the readiness for college, some different paths that you might consider for your child if college isn't the right path, what the range of support looks like at college, and I'll share some resources with you at the end. So when we think about college, there are a few things that are really important to think about in terms of the foundation, let's say. We need to make sure that we're considering the student's academic, emotional, and social needs in selecting colleges. We need to make sure that we're covering all the aspects, the whole child. It's really important for a good fit for students to be in a place that they can really be successful and happy. And if you are doing the work in the college process and your child is not, then that might be something to consider in terms of whether or not your child should be going to college yet, or maybe you need to look at some alternatives in the meantime. So for college readiness, I like to think of a three-legged stool. Academic ability, emotional regulation, and social skills. And if one of those legs is pulled out from the stool, what happens? There's no stability. Okay, it's unbalanced. And students need to be equally ready emotionally, socially, and academically. What often happens is that parents see academic ability and focus on getting the best grades, which is also important, but it's also important for students to be ready for being independent. Okay. So, for example, here's a student who says, I've prepared a PowerPoint presentation that explains why I didn't do my homework. Okay, so if you have a student who's very creative but finds other things to do, that may be something he needs to learn, developing some executive functioning skills before he's ready to go off to college. So one of the ways to think about readiness is by fostering independence and self-advocacy. And I know that in FCPS, the transition coordinators and the career coordinators are working with students to develop these skills so that they can go into the workplace or into college. And so what happens when a student feels that sense of independence and self-advocacy? It gives them a sense of purpose, and they develop their own motivation. It also helps build their self-esteem and give them that sense of independence that they can do things on their own. And it really develops a confidence. The earlier you start teaching students to do things by themselves on their own, the more confidence they have that will stay with them all their life. And it leads to taking ownership for learning. Now, granted, it's not all going to happen on a timeline that we want. Some students will develop a lot earlier and some students will take a lot longer. But that's the goal, is to get to the point where the student is as independent as possible. So here's a couple of couples. We're trying to reconcile her need for independence with our ability to run her life better than she does. And this is the struggle that a lot of parents go through, is the push and pull, letting go, but letting students make some mistakes along the way. And it's better for them to make those mistakes when they're in high school than when they're in college. Okay. So when we think about being ready for college, we also need to think about the students having a neuropsych report that is prepared for the college age, prepared for students who are 16 or older and who have had the WAIS, which is the adult version of the WISC. For those of you that have had the WISC, you would know that it's offered at 16 years or above. And colleges prefer to see that because it's more normed for adults. Then the tests of achievement, for example, Woodcut-Johnson. And when you go in for testing, if your child has had a foreign language substitution or exemption in high school, you want to make sure that that is documented in the report, because oftentimes colleges will allow for a substitution in foreign language and sometimes in math if there's a math disability. And so you want to make sure that the testing is up to date. It's usually within 3 years of attending college that the colleges would like to see it. There is some flexibility. So you can check with the school. Sometimes I'll recommend checking with the school that you're looking at, the college that you're looking at, and ask them if, let's say you have 4-year-old testing, would they accept it? Sometimes they will. And the worst case is that you'd have to get it redone then over the summer before your child starts school in the fall. But if you don't have to get it done and you can avoid having another set of tests done, then that is better. So when we think about college accommodations, they are somewhat different than the accommodations that you think about when you talk about when you think about high school accommodations. And so you want to make sure that when you have testing done, that the psychologist who does the testing puts in accommodations that are available in the college, not just those that are for high school. For example, colleges offer note takers as an accommodation. You want to make sure that that accommodation is an anonymous note taker. Some colleges will allow the student to ask someone else to take notes, but that's not really an accommodation. An accommodation of a note taker is when someone in the class is asked to take notes by the professor, and they might be taking notes for several people in the class, and they would take the notes, drop them off at the learning center, and then the students would come pick them up, and they don't know who took the notes, and the people who took the notes don't know who's getting the notes. That's an accommodation. Priority registration is another good accommodation to have. That means that students can register before the other students in their class, and that gives them an opportunity, let's say, to have a late class start, or to balance their classes without having too many reading classes, to spread their classes out a little bit more. And it really helps with some students who need that accommodation. Reduced course load is also important. Anything from 12 to 18 credits is considered full-time. Students can drop down to 12 credits, which is what I recommend. Actually, no, to answer the question about the chat. Reduced course load is another good accommodation. Late class start. Sometimes you have a student who can't get up early in the morning and they want to start at 10 o'clock and they want to take later classes. That's fine, that can be done. Foreign language substitution, as I mentioned, that is an accommodation. And math is not so much of an accommodation, but math is when math would be more like a quantitative requirement. And when a student is not good in math, they might be able to take a course that is science-based math or the history of math, something that's math related, but not a serious math course. And so some schools have that option, and that's another thing to consider. Okay. So another factor to consider is, what are your priorities as a family? So what I usually recommend to my clients is to sit down with your student who's going to college, either do it separately or together, and determine what's most important to you. These are just some examples. Is it the distance from home? Do you want a particular size school? Do you like a certain environment? How much support do you need? And try to come up with the top 5. Maybe it is a beautiful campus. Maybe that matters. You know, the buildings, you want them to be red brick, whatever it is. The one thing you shouldn't base the college on is the major. Students change their majors so often between even junior year and by the time they get to college, they're going to be changing their minds. Yes, you can make sure that the major is at the college, but it doesn't matter if the college is known for a particular major in most cases. There are certain majors, of course, that it matters. But in general, the fit of the college is what matters. Your child has to be successful. So it could have the best, you know, writing major, but if your child isn't able to do the work and get the help, it doesn't matter that it's the best writing major. So what you want to do is find out the top 5 And then every college you visit, you look at your criteria and you compare them to each other. And that helps you narrow down the colleges. It can be a beautiful campus, but if that's not one of your top 5 priorities, that's not a reason to choose it. It needs to have the other things that you really care about in the analysis. Okay, so disability or difference. For a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. And for those of you that are not on video, there's a monkey, a penguin, an elephant, a fish, a seal, I believe that is, and a dog standing in front of the person talking, asking them all to climb the tree. We all know that students are individuals, and they all have their individual strengths and personalities. And they all have different needs at different times. Some things can be adapted for all, but why not try to find the best college or post-secondary program for your child rather than trying to fit your child into a university that might not be the best learning environment because everyone's going there or their friends are going there. It really is important to be in a place where they can be successful. So in planning for college, the specific needs of your child should really be the first criterion that you look at, and then other priorities can be considered. So if your child isn't ready for college, they're not ready to climb the tree, so to speak, what are some of the options to consider? There are many alternate paths to college and alternate paths to independence that don't include college. So we're going to talk about a few of them here. One is called a postgraduate year. And this is when a student isn't quite ready for college. Community college is not the only option. Community college is good if your child needs another year at home and isn't mature enough to leave home. But if your child has the maturity to leave home but isn't ready either academically or needs to develop executive functioning or time management or organization skills, then a postgraduate year could be a good option. And this is on a high school campus where 9th through 12th grade boarding school has a postgraduate or PG year. And students can either take community college classes at the program or continue to take more advanced high school classes, but they're learning to live on their own under supervision, to develop the habits they need to be independent, but they still have someone guiding them and helping them. It's very difficult when you're at home to become independent from your parents, even with the best intentions, because everyone sort of falls back into the same, habits. You might be out all day being independent, then you come home and, your parents make dinner for you or do things for you, and you're like, okay, this is good. I don't have to do it for myself. But when you're away, you do have to. And so the next category would be independent life skills programs. And these are for students who might be on the autism spectrum, who might have ADHD, executive functioning issues, social anxiety, and who really need to learn some of the basic self-care, social skills for being out in the real world. And maybe they want to take 1 or 2 college classes. Maybe they don't, but they're living in a program, they're living with a small group of students under supervision, either in a dorm or houses or apartments, and they're gaining those skills. They're having classes in money management, in social give and take, in current events, in basic consumer math, how to balance your, whatever it's called today, balancing your checkbook, how to use your ATM card, and how to make sure your bank account is solid. All those skills that some students need to learn as a stepping stone can be gotten here. And as I said, some of these programs you can take 1 or 2 college courses, but you're getting the support from the program. So you'll have tutors for every class, and ADHD coaching for every class, and you're getting a lot of support learning how to do college. The next category is transition programs. There aren't as many of these. There used to be more, but they're basically on a college campus where a student's doing some developmental coursework and maybe 1 or 2 credit-bearing courses, and they're gradually learning what it takes to be a college student. Internship programs are where students go and they, again, live like they're in a college along with other students, and they work at an internship. The internship is provided by the program. Most of them have lots of companies in the area that are willing to have interns, and the internship program helps students develop that independence of having to get up and go to work, having to be responsible, and also having to manage a social life after work that doesn't have any boundaries or anything to stop you from socializing how you would like to. And then you have the gap year. So the gap year program is when students are not taking a year off, but they might be doing something non-academic that can enhance their learning, can give them a better understanding of themselves, give them more direction. And there are lots of different ways to do gap year programs. Some of them are actual programs, and sometimes students stay home and work, have a part-time job, or actually do some of the internship programs that are out there. But the goal for a gap year, oops, I don't have that. Let me go back. Here it is. The goal for the gap year is to gain those skills that you need in order to be ready for college or the workforce. So travel, community service, internships, employment, they all are good ways to use your year. And the goal is to develop leadership and self-confidence, maybe social skills, to grow emotionally, and to become more independent. So all of these will happen during that year. When students are taking a year to develop themselves, they tend to really be much more prepared for college the following year. Just having had a year to explore and to think about what they really want to do in life. College does not have to come right after high school. If some students are not ready, they're much better off doing something else, even if it's working for a couple of years, until they're ready. Because if they're not ready, it can be very damaging to their self-esteem to not be successful. And it's really a myth that everyone graduates high school and then goes to college and graduates in 4 years. The statistics just don't show that anymore. All right, let's see if I missed. Let me go back to this one. Okay, so I did mean to do this first. Many paths can lead to success. So this shows you a lot of ways that you can get to reach your goal. You know, starting in high school, you can take a gap year and go right to college. You can start off in a life skills program, and that might get you to college, but maybe then you just go out into the workforce. You can start with a PG year and then a life skills program and employment or college, or then take a gap year, or do a transition program and then a life skills program. So there are many, many paths to independence, and the real goal is independence. I would hope and I imagine that as parents, your goal is for your child to be as independent as possible, to be resilient and capable, and lead a life that they can do as much as they can for themselves. So when we talk about the types of support that are available on the college campus, I group them into 4 categories. And these are the categories that I've come up with to define how much a college offers for students. So by law, every college has to offer accommodations. to students who qualify. But some of those schools offer just very, very basic accommodations. What that means is, let's say your child has extended time as an accommodation, and he's taking a test in a classroom. The teachers teaching, the teachers in the classroom, and the student's time isn't, there's still time for the student to take the test, but the class is over. So the teacher says, okay, come with me, you can finish the test in my office. So the student has to get up in the middle of his exam. He was probably writing a really interesting essay and he has to break his train of thought and go into the professor's office, and the professor has office hours. So during the office hours, the student's taking his test, but the phone is ringing, the door is opening and closing, and people are talking. But by law, he got his extended time. There is no law that says you have to have a distraction-reduced setting for that extended time. Or at least most of the time, it's basic. So if your child needs more than that, you want to look at some other types of colleges. Fortunately, most colleges fall into the moderate support services category. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So this is a chart of support services, and it gives you an overview of what to look for. So it's divided into services and programs. Programs are generally fee-based. Services are available to every student on campus who has a documentation of a learning disability. So I mentioned the basic ADA compliance. You can read and see what that is. Fortunately, as I said, most colleges fall into the moderate category. They might be bordering on just compliant, but they might be bordering on comprehensive support. So you need to ask a lot of questions. There's usually a learning specialist. They often have distraction-reduced settings. They might have peer and professional tutors, and professional tutors are definitely what you want to look for. They'll help advocate. If the student's having a problem with a professor, they will be a good advocate for you. They might have workshops and coaching, specialized summer programs, and they might have some drop-in types of tutoring as well. And then on the right side, the programs, comprehensive support and social support. There are some colleges that offer specific social support programs for students who are on the autism spectrum, have any kind of social communication challenges, social anxiety, anything that you know that they're not going to look for activities to do, but they will go to an activity if it's being planned for them. So they feel like they're more in a group. So a lot of these programs will say, we're all going to a concert, or we're all going to this game on campus. Let's meet together in this building and we'll all go. And that way students have a place to go and they're not sitting in their dorm rooms. That's the danger when students have the issues with social support. They don't know what to do on the weekends. They might be fine in the classroom, but it's the outside of class time that's the problem. And then the comprehensive support, mostly for students who have academic needs and who have needs of tutoring, needs of coaching. They have professional tutors. Many of them have 30 or 40 tutors that work part-time or full-time. They have a director who's got a background in learning differences or a psychologist. And they are limited in number, so your child has a specific learning specialist throughout the time they're there. Okay. And just so, I'm sure you have some questions about some examples. Oops, it's not working again. So here's just a few examples of colleges that are in the moderate support category, the comprehensive programs, and social support programs. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, but it just gives you an example. You'll notice that the The selectivity of the college doesn't matter. You have UNC Chapel Hill on there as moderate support, which is a very, very difficult college, a very selective, difficult college to get into. And you have a variety of schools that all offer moderate support because it's more about the culture on the campus. You want to look for a campus that values all different learning styles and that embraces all different types of learners. It's not okay just because they give good support that the college itself is going to be good, because everybody has to buy in, and you have to make sure that your child is comfortable and is not going to have any problems with professors who might not believe that ADHD is real. Then you have the comprehensive programs, and then the social support programs. And you'll see Mercyhurst University is on 2 different lists. Colleges have more than one program often. There are others here that do as well. And just because they have moderate support, they might also have a comprehensive program. But any college that has a comprehensive program will also have moderate support for if you don't want the program, you just want the support. Okay. Now, does anybody know, I don't think we have the chat's not showing up, but okay, so I was going to ask if you know about which colleges are exclusively for students who learn differently, but the answer is 2, Beacon College and Landmark College. There are only 2 colleges in the country that are for students, exclusively for students who learn differently. Every other college in the country is a mainstream, regular college, and you will never find more than 3% of the students that are using the disability services at these colleges. So when students say, oh, I heard that college is just for kids with learning differences, or I don't want my child going to a school that's for learning differences, you're just eliminating 2. Okay, you still have 2,300 or 2,298 colleges to look at across the country. Okay, so now I'd like to open it up to questions. What is this? I'd like to open it up to questions, and before I take questions, I will be happy to supply anyone with the slides from the PowerPoint. You may feel free to email me and just leave me a message or email me and let me know that you're interested in them, in the slides, or if you want that spectrum of support chart, I can also send that to you. I'm happy to answer questions that I can't get to here. Okay, so there is a question, can I talk about community college and then transferring to a 4-year college? Well, okay, so the email is on the slide. And, okay, yeah, so, everything keeps popping up. Let me talk a little bit about community college and transferring to 4-year colleges. So community college certainly has a place, and you have to be aware of whether or not your child needs more support than is being offered. There's this misunderstanding that community college is easier than a 4-year college. And that's not necessarily the case. Community colleges can have some rigorous courses. And sometimes, if your student needs a lot of tutoring or support, a 4-year college can actually offer more than a community college, and with a consistent tutor or a consistent coach. Certainly, you can go to a community college for 2 years and then transfer to a 4-year college. What you won't gain is the independence, if that's what you're looking for, until your child leaves home. So if your reasons for it is that you want to make sure your child is ready for college, your child won't be any more ready for college than if your child is goes away right away versus staying home for 2 years. Either way, you're going to need to use that first year away as the year of gaining independence. Can I ask a question of the moderator? Do you
Yes.
want me to answer questions as they pop up, or do you want to ask them?
Sure. What I was no, thank you for that. Actually, that's I don't know if anyone saw or can see. There's a at the bottom of your screen, it looks like a little person with their arm up in the air. You can use that. Having presented before, I know the difficulty that Judy's facing of when you're speaking and trying to monitor the chat at the same time. It can be very difficult. So what we'd like to ask people to do is, if you have a question and you're comfortable speaking, if you could please click on the button. I'm clicking on it right now, and you'll see that I just raised my hand. And there you go. Exactly. Thank you, Matt. And then Judy will be able to see that and be able to answer your question. And we will go in the order that the hands are up. So maybe we want to. David did actually have a question first before Matt raised his hand. So Judy, would you like to answer the David's question over going over the differences between comprehensive and social support programs for colleges?
Okay. So let me go back to that slide. So the comprehensive programs are more academically based, and when you are in a comprehensive program, it's because, let's say that the child does not have the self-advocacy skills to go to the teachers to ask for the help. You know that maybe they're not going to show up for help. The comprehensive program is part of their schedule. They are going to meet with somebody every week, or once a month, once every 2 weeks, whatever they decide they need. They're going to meet with their learning specialist, and that person is going to help with monitoring tutoring, with giving them the executive functioning support they need, but being sort of like their case manager and helping them through whatever struggles they might have. But it doesn't cover social issues. So if a student is having trouble socially, that's where the social skills comes in. The social support is also going to do some of the academics. They're going to have professional tutors. They're going to work, and the learning specialists act as case managers. They're going to be doing the comprehensive piece plus some more. A lot of times the students who need social support don't need academic support. And some colleges, you can be in both programs or straddle both programs. You wouldn't need to be in both programs. But most of the time, the social support also provides what the comprehensive does, plus the social. Okay. Other questions?
Yes, thank you so much. Matt, I see that you also had a question, or you'd raised your hand. So you should have access to your mic if you'd like to speak. Oh, you had your question answered. Okay, even better.
Okay. Someone just asked a question about age.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an age limit, like 22, to go to college? No, there's no age limit. I work with students who are in their late 20s and even their 30s who are coming back. And it's mostly students who have learning differences, and they weren't successful, and they thought they weren't good college material. And then later on, when they were more mature and they realized that they could go to college, they looked to go back to college. My own daughter, as an example, who has severe anxiety and ADHD, wasn't really ready for college till she was 25. You know, she started in college, she dropped out, she went to a few community colleges here and there, and she's very, very bright, but she just couldn't get organized enough and sit still and do all that. So she finally at 25 decided that she was ready. And then gathering all her community college classes, she managed to graduate in 2 years, 2 more years from a college, and then went on and got her master's. But that wasn't until after 30 years old. So there's no need to rush through college. It's much better to wait until your child is going for the right reasons. Okay.
And it looks
You're
like
welcome.
that there was a piggyback question on there about state tuition.
Yeah, see, I'm not getting the questions. I don't know why.
That's okay. So the person asked if you were talking about colleges and, you know, is there a limit on when you could start or not? And you answered that. And person had the same question about in-state tuition. I would imagine the question was, is there a limit, an age limit on in-state tuition?
Oh, no. Students can go to college at any age. They might not want to live in the dorms when they're a little older, and they might want to have an apartment. But no, you can start college. You can go to community college. In fact, community college has a lot of older students who are coming back. Veterans are a good example, and students who just weren't ready to go. I just saw something pop up about do you have to have an IEP? Where did that go? Does a student need to have an IEP in order to get services, accommodations, or is a medical diagnosis enough? A medical diagnosis is valid if there's a medical disorder. You know, if there's a health issue, you get the accommodations that are based on your needs for the health issue. If you have a learning disability, you need to have documentation that shows that it's a learning disability. In colleges, the good thing about colleges is that they are all very, very open to giving accommodations, okay? I know some of you might have struggled in high school thinking that, you know, your son or daughter should have had this or that, or didn't quite get enough support or the right support. But when you're in college, the student is an adult and the student needs to advocate. But if you say that you need something and you have documentation for it, you will get it. Will the college accommodate modified test format? No, there are no modifications in a credit-bearing college program because the K through 12 law is an education law. IDEA is an education law. Students are entitled to get an education at their level. The ADA, which is where 504 is, and the ADA is what applies to college, that's just providing access. So you have access to, I like to give the example if someone, let's say, is in a wheelchair. A college needs to make sure that they have first level class or an elevator in the building, but no one needs to push the student into the classroom in the wheelchair. The student just has to get there by herself. But the program has to provide access to that room. It's the same thing. Access just means that if the student needs a note taker, if the student needs a reader or a scribe, those will all be provided, but they have to be able to do the level of work that that college requires. Now, there are college programs for students with intellectual disabilities, and that is very different, that they do modify. And if you are interested in that, there's a website called Think College, and you can find all kinds of programs that are on there for students who are going to college non-matriculated and non-credit. Okay.
And Judy, if I could just jump back for a second, the person who was asking about in-state, they clarified, they were talking specifically about in-state tuition.
In-state tuition, can you get in-state tuition when you're older?
Yes, that was the question. I misunderstood it.
If you live in a state, you live in the state. I mean, if you live in Virginia, and you apply for an in-state college, that's a state university, you pay the tuition for the person who lives in the state. I don't think that changes by age.
Excellent. No, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that that I asked the question that the parent was asking.
Sure.
And then it looks like the next question is, will the college accommodate modified test format as well as workload?
Right. I did. No. I answered the modified test format. I didn't answer the workload. The workload, no, not either. What you would do is take a reduced course load. You would just take fewer courses and take longer to graduate. That's how you would get around that. And then where can I find a list as to which colleges have moderate offices and comprehensive programs? Well, I do have a website called College Web LD that you can go on, and it's got my research, and maybe you'll have it at school one day. You can look on there, and I will put it in the chat so if anybody's interested.
Thank you.
Sure.
I see that Deborah M is raising her hand for a question, but Deborah, I'm not finding you. Trevor, I don't know if you see her.
Yeah, I found her. I added her as a presenter. Yeah, she should have audio capabilities now to ask a question.
I see her now. Thank you. So, Deborah, would you like to ask your question?
No, maybe we'll give her a moment to open up her speaker. I see what kinds of accommodations are available for high school students with dyslexia relative to spelling and writing, and would these accommodations transfer to college to fulfill required foreign language requirements? As I said earlier, if you have dyslexia or any kind of learning disability that makes foreign language difficult for you, you would then request a substitution for that foreign language, or you could take American Sign Language. But that depends on the college, and that is an important question to ask. If you have been, if let's say you're getting a standard diploma and you're not taking foreign language, if you have a documented learning disability and it's in your documentation, then when you apply to a college that has that requirement, you can write and say, you'll notice I didn't take the foreign language, but I have dyslexia and I was allowed to not have that for high school. So when you get to college, the kinds of things that they're going to help you with dyslexia are audiobooks and a reader if you need it. Those are the kinds of things. And accommodations don't necessarily transfer because there are different needs in college than in high school. For example, you rarely see priority seating in college because people can sit where they want. So, but you would see it in high school. Okay. College tuition. Is the tuition the same between students with and without disabilities? Yes, there is no difference in tuition as long as if you're just using services. Whoops, that was my timer. I can't turn this timer off. So there's no difference in tuition as long as you're using services. There is a fee if you want to become part of the comprehensive program, but that's not a requirement. Oh, how do you determine what the best alternate path for your child is? How do you determine what the best alternate path is for your child? Well, if you have a psychoed testing, there should be recommendations in there. If not, I would go back to the person who did the testing and ask that question, what are you recommending for my child? Or ask the transition coordinators at your school, what do you recommend? There's no right way or wrong way. It's just if your child is not interested in academics, then you're going to look for a different route. If your child is very interested in academics, but doesn't have the social ability or the emotional stability to go to college, then you might want to look at one of the programs that offers college courses. If your child is not able to take a full-time course load and needs work in other areas, you can find those programs as well. So you really just have to look at the programs and see what makes sense. There you go. Okay, so there's a, I missed, it's all popping out here. I missed that. Somebody, Judy had just put something in.
Yeah, Judy Lieberman, and thank you for that, Judy, about the public page for assistive technology.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So she put that in the chat if anyone would like to click on the link.
Okay, so somebody asked, do colleges provide the testing for qualifying for these programs? Most colleges do not. You have to get the testing privately or hopefully through your school. And then someone asked about tuition assistance in FAFSA for full-time. That is correct. You have to have 12 credits, but if you take part-time classes, if you have a medical disability or a qualifying disability, I should say, and I don't know where the line is drawn, you can be considered full-time with 9 credits. It is not something you start with. You would always want to start with 12 credits and try to do that. So you're not saying you're taking 9, but if for some reason you weren't able to stick with them and you had to drop a class, you wouldn't lose your financial aid if you had proper documentation from a doctor saying that this was required. I had to do that for my daughter, so I know that it can be done. It was just 1 semester that she dropped to 9 credits, and the letter prevented her from losing that tuition. Gap year program. Okay. Someone asked, can you explain what a gap year program is? So a gap year is really just anything you're doing between high school and college. There's one program locally called Broad Futures. It's an internship program. Students go for the day, and it's a daytime program. It's not an overnight program. And they work at internships, and they learn, it's all for students who have learning differences, and they learn how to be an employee. They learn about resumes and dressing for business. That's one example. Students live at home, and they do an internship. It could be that students go away to a program and do an internship that you pay for as a program, but they're gaining those skills of independence. There are travel programs. Students can travel to different countries, I guess, hopefully one day. The program name, Broad Futures. I will put it in here. It's here locally in DC. And so you can do a lot of different things, but the purpose of the gap year should be emotional growth and getting ready. Thank you, Maggie. You got the whole the website. The purpose of the gap year is to gain those skills you need to be ready for college. Okay. Woodrow Wilson Rehab Center. I'm not familiar with it in terms of its relation to college.
May I speak on the Woodrow?
Yes.
Thank you. I see the parent is asking it's easy for me to say. The name changed a few years ago. It's now called the Wilson Workforce Rehabilitation Center in Fisherville, Virginia. And you're asking if it's like college or is it different? It is different. The Wilson Workforce, WWRC, in Fisherville, Virginia, is a state-run training program, and it is for people with disabilities. Students, there's a student side, and of course, then there's an adult side, and the DARS, who spoke last night, the Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services. You would need to apply for services through DARS, and if your child is still in school, your transition person in the school can help you apply for services through them. And then if approved if you're found eligible for those services, then you would say, I want my child to go to WWRC, and application's completed, it's sent. But at first you go to assess, and then you may go back for training. The training could be anywhere from 3 months to a year and a half, depending on what the person is wanting to learn and how quickly they move through it. They are learning, soft and hard skills, very, specific skills, but it is not like college. There's no diploma that's issued when you complete the program. Mm-hmm. So I hope that's helpful. So it is different. It's very different from college, and also because it's a state program. I beg your pardon. DARS pays for it, so it's not out of pocket for families.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions? Could you do that during a gap year? Of course. I mean, if you're qualified for that program, that could be a way to determine what your next step is, I would imagine. Someone put in something with FCPS about gap year fairs. There are gap year fairs that come around every year. I think they're doing a virtual one this year. I'm not sure. But there are lots and lots of programs. You can go on to their website. They changed it. I think it's Gap Year Fairs USA. I will try to find out if I can. GapYearAssociation.org is one. Okay, let me put that down. So Gap Year. .org. And then there's Gap Year Fairs, but they just got taken over by somebody else, and I'm not sure if their name changed or not. But those are two places. If my son has an applied diploma, can he enter college? Clem, can you help me out with the applied diploma?
Sure. The applied diploma is the standard diploma is the diploma you and I got when we went to high school. The applied diploma is for students who have an IEP and are not able to take the standard curriculum, pass the final exams, the SOLs.
Okay, so it's a modified diploma in a way. So the answer to that is yes, but in a special program. So your child can go to a college program through like looking at Think College, and they're non-credit, but the students can have the college experience and take the classes. Yeah.
I apologize. That was in response to a different question. Just to let everybody, I'm glad the question is still coming. We have 2 more minutes.
Right, for any last question.
So yeah, please continue to ask questions.
And as I said, please feel free to email me afterwards if you have any questions. I'm more than happy to answer them. Do we have schools like Exceptional Minds for careers in animation and visual effects? Yeah, I'm familiar with the school in California. Really, it's really up to the student. If the student is available to do that, if the student is able to do those things and be self-motivated, yes. Mason Life is correct. Mason Life is a diploma program? Yes. This is going so fast. If your son is trying to major in education, what kind of documents does he need to get admitted? It doesn't matter what your major is for college, as long as you have your high school diploma and you have a GPA that college requires, then you can apply to that college. Okay, I think we're out of time. So real quick, question about SATs. I would say if you're a junior or a senior this year, you do not need to worry about SAT or ACT. The likelihood is that even next year, there's 1,500 colleges right now that are test optional or test blind. and that's probably going to stay for another year. So yes, under normal circumstances, students do take the SAT and the ACT, and they get their accommodations for that as well. Okay, thank you all very much for taking the time to listen to the webinar today, and if I can provide any other help, I'm happy to do so. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for a terrific presentation and a perfect segue into our parent panel. This is terrific. So for our second, oh no, geez. And thank you to our participants for so many great questions. I'd like to mention again, as we begin our second session, if you require a Spanish interpreter, please click on the link in the chat. And I would also like to invite Mr. Molina to share this with our guests as well.
Buenas noches, mi nombre es Luis Enríquez y seré su intérprete. Si necesitan traducción para español, va a haber un enlace en el chat box. En letritas azules subrayadas, hagan clic en ese y eso lo llevará al breakout room de español. Gracias.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so in addition, you're also going to notice that there's another link in the chat. This is for everybody. It will take you to a short form allowing us to collect feedback on the session you just heard with Ms. Bass. So please click on the link and complete the survey. We have to hear from you if we're going to make our events better year after year. So please take the time to respond to that. And now I'm going to turn over the mic to our job coach supervisors, Maggie Contreras and Sharon Denisar, and they will introduce our parent and student panel. So ladies, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Clem. Hi, everyone. This is Sharon Denisar, and I'm pleased to introduce our parent-student panel for this evening. It's always nice to learn and listen to people who have experienced the transition from high school to their post-secondary choices. And we always gain so much knowledge by listening. So our first parent and student panel participant is Karen Colazio and her son Lucas. Now, I did not see them in the participants group. Are you with us, Karen and Lucas?
Okay, I don't see them either, but we will let you know as soon as they enter.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And then next on our parent panel, we have Linnell Palencia, who happens to be one of our ETRs with Career and Transition Services. But tonight, she's going to talk with us about her experience with her daughter. So Linnell, are you with us tonight? Oh, I think she's reconnecting. Can we make her a moderator when she comes in, please?
Sure. Linnell is in and she's a moderator. She may be having mic issues.
Oh, there she is. Okay, very good. Linnell, can you hear us? Okay. All right, well, Linnell, we'll give you a few minutes. And then also we have Ursula and Chris Pache. I hope I pronounced that properly. Are you guys with us this evening?
Yes, we're here.
We are.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. All right, so thank you for spending time with us this evening. We ask that each family spend about 10 minutes talking about your experience transitioning out of FCPS in order to help your child reach their post-secondary goals. And then once we're finished with the talking segment, we're going to open it up to questions from our participants. All right, so why don't we start with Linnell? If you would be so kind, Linnell, just to kind of chat with us about your experiences with your daughter. Linnell? I wonder if she's having mic problems. All right. Why don't we go on down to Ursula and Chris, and we'll start with you. Okay, Linnell is going to try to reconnect. So Ursula and Chris, why don't we start with you? And if you could share with us about your experience with your child exiting out of FCPS.
Sure, and actually I think it's, good evening everyone. It's probably a good thing if we start because we have not completed this transition process yet. We have a 16-year-old son named Nico. He is a junior at West Potomac High School. And so we were asked to come on and sort of share at this point some of the obstacles we've experienced, how we've overcome them, what we wish we had known when we started, some recommendations that we could share, and sort of the outcome that we're hoping for in the next couple of years. So would you like us to wait and see if Linnell's mic is working, or do you want us to go now?
Oh no, if you could proceed, that would be wonderful.
Sure, absolutely. So like I said, we have a 16-year-old. He just really briefly, he's a young man with autism, high functioning autism, but definitely on the spectrum, not Asperger's, not low incidence. He is incredibly kind and fiercely conscientious with a deep sense of justice. We may be a little biased, but we love him quite a lot. He loves school and the responsibilities of being more grown up and almost being an adult. And that certainly has been really helpful in his transition journey so far. So I tend to talk a lot. I'm an educator also. So I'm going to start with my big point and then let my husband talk a little bit. I just wanted to make sure that we shared the biggest lesson that we've experienced so far. And we really began going to transition workshops and parent trainings that were available when Nico was in 4th grade. So it's a journey that we started early. And the biggest lesson we've learned so far is really to make sure that others are really listening to your child and to you. So the example I like to use is, imagine there's a child who in elementary school says they like cars. People are so excited to hear something definitive of what a student is interested in that they may not dig deep enough or really kind of keep an eye on how this interest develops over the years. So something as simple as, what do you like about cars and why? So by digging deeper, someone might realize that the child who says they like cars, it really wasn't about the cars. They liked the color or the shape, the design. They liked how different and similar they are, or maybe they were actually talking about the movie Cars. So we experienced something rather similar with Nico from a very young age, as a lot of kids do. He said he really liked animals and he wanted to take care of animals when he grew up. So the default, of course, is, oh, you want to be a vet. But what we have figured out over the years by really listening to him and really talking about opportunities in terms of what jobs might be available after high school, that really he does not want to be a vet. In fact, while he loves animals and wants to take care of them and their environment, he doesn't really want to handle animals. So that has been a real goal for us in 10th and 11th grade, to help Nico communicate really what that means for him in terms of post-secondary jobs and opportunities for him. So really this idea of thinking creatively about jobs, both locations and job descriptions, and also really trying to focus on the soft skills and global skills that all employees need: punctuality, being polite, etc. So that's the biggest lesson, that we're kind of sitting in that right now. And so we want to impart that, if that's helpful. And then really 2 other main points. The first is it was important to have our child be involved in the process as young as possible and acceptable, and as much as possible and acceptable. So that could be something as simple as letting him try things when he was in elementary school, even though it's hard, really taking cues from him. And we relied quite heavily on the resources provided through I'm Determined, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. It's a state-sponsored program through the Virginia Department of Education. But starting in 4th grade, we used some of their resources for Nico to introduce himself and his IEP meetings and to really clarify his strengths, his weaknesses, you know, how did he learn best? What did he need from teachers to learn? And that's developed every year. So now he's really clarifying what he wants while he remains in FCPS to help him with specific job searches when he's finished. I'm going to pass it on to my husband for a minute.
I think the point about, you know, start early, but you don't have to start everything too early is a point. I mean, as Ursula said, we've been going to these workshops for the better part of 7-8 years now. You know, I remember going to these things very early on when he was in, you know, 4th, 5th grade, and you know, and Ursula's here taking notes feverishly on everything and things like this. And I think it's important to go to these things with a mind that you're going to hear some interesting things and some interesting points, but you also need to have this big picture context with it as well. And just to know that there are resources there. Not that you need to deal with them right away, but there are things that you'll hear that are of interest or of a particular need for you, but it's one of those things like, you know, he's 10 or something. I don't need to worry about this, but it's one of those things you keep it in the back of your mind, you table it for as you go through the process, you know that you can then pull it out later. I think so in that sense, starting early gives you that perspective and that context that you're going to need that you know, coming into this process later, you can draw on those tools that you've learned and that you've developed through, well, really going through the school system is useful. I think another important point too here that I want to make is that you really need to, I mean, look, having a child with a disability is really difficult as a parent. For your child, having a disability is really difficult. Don't make life harder. Really try and find a way to collaborate, communicate, and compromise as you go through the process with the school. Be honest with them as to what your child's strengths and weaknesses are, and know very well that those strengths and weaknesses may differ depending on the environment. You know, it's one of those things where if they can keep it together at school for 7 or 8 hours a day and have to have a meltdown at home, that's okay. If the wheels come off the bus at home, if they can keep it together at school, and just know that those differences are fine and that they're acceptable, but also be able to communicate that with the teacher and with the IAs and with the transition team that you're working with. They're all part of this. And I think if you really have that collaborative approach with them, it makes the process a lot easier. And they have expertise in things that as a parent, you don't.
Yeah.
Rely on them, but you have to start at the beginning from a very fundamentally collaborative position.
Yeah, and we've been very, very lucky that Nico's team has always been very receptive to questions and kind of problem solving when we needed to. In terms of that not needing to worry about everything all at once idea, we certainly have leaned heavily on faculty, staff, paraprofessionals, and now We have a wonderful, or Nico has a wonderful ETR. So, you know, a piece of advice is if you're feeling anxious about something that's coming up in your child's future as part of the transition process, so thinking about guardianship, something like that, shoot an email to your ETR, express that that's an anxiety that you're having, because as Chris said, they are the experts. They will help you. We won't talk too much longer, I promise. Yes, I'm sorry, employment transitional rep. You will hear various timelines from different professionals and from other families and friends. And I can remember hearing from when Nico was maybe in 2nd grade already, quote unquote, it's never too early to start, which is true, but it's also incredibly anxiety producing. So as much as it's never too early to start, it's also never too late to start. And it's never too late to come back and address an issue, make a change, let your child continue to develop and change as a person, and then maybe the questions that you're asking in team meetings are different. I will say for sure, as you can hear, Chris and I have been able to divide and conquer when it comes to these things, because as you know, as 2 different parents, we have different perspective. So it is helpful if parents and guardians or parents and other family members can split some of the detail so that it doesn't feel like it's just one person who has to carry all of this in their brain, if you can. The transition toolkit and all of the resources available through the county are amazing. Take everything, keep everything. Don't feel like you need to address every piece of paper given to you immediately. Think about where your child is and think about goals sort of in different chunks. You know, this quarter we want XYZ. By the time they enter middle school, this is what we want. By the time they're entering their senior year, this is a goal they have. So, and making sure as your child is able and the age that they are involved in that goal setting. You know, asking them for input to come up with goals for post-secondary work, but also something as simple as, hey, what's a goal you want for your senior year? And they might say, I want to be able to buy lunch every Friday in the cafeteria by myself. You know, having them give that input. And the last thing is, in the transition toolkit, I think it's in the current one, we have several versions. There are those sort of guides of what your child should be able to do independently, sort of life skills and academic skills at different grade levels. Those are fantastic. Use them as a guide. Don't panic if your child can't do everything for a particular year. And don't get discouraged if mastery of a skill kind of wanes and wavers. It's really about what your child needs and what's right for your family. And lastly, you know, don't be afraid to reach out to your ETR and to your teachers if there are questions and concerns. They would, from our opinion, they would rather hear a question or a concern rather than try to solve a problem when it gets too big.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
Ursula and Chris, thank you so much for sharing your words of wisdom. I think that Career and Transition Services would like to make you honorary members of our team, because you know so much about career and transition. So we thank you so much for your powerful words. We're going to open it up to questions in a little bit, but now I'm going to, I think we have Linnell ready to present. Linnell, are you with us?
I hope so. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank goodness. I don't know what happened. I'm so glad. Thanks.
Glad you're with us. Thank you.
That was wonderful. You guys, are going to be great resources, maybe in the future to other families too coming up. So thanks for that. I'm guessing this is probably a mixed crowd, and you know, when I share my experiences, I have my daughter has a learning disability. She, the one that we're speaking about with an IEP, was dyslexic, and she came up through Fairfax County in high school. She actually went to a Catholic school through grade 8. And being a special educator, I knew she had dyslexia, but her brother had started in the Catholic school, and it was difficult to pull her back. But I knew right along she would go to high school and the public school because she was going to need a lot of support to get through, you know, by that time. So, but the good thing was that she had really been forced to learn a lot of self advocacy in the Catholic school, because she really had to ask for accommodations. So she came to public high school with an IEP, and she did end up graduating with an advanced studies diploma and went on to George Mason University, and she's a senior. Um, but interestingly, my older son ended up having a 504 plan, and their experiences were very different because he had not been identified until high school and then needed a 504 plan, whereas she had been identified early, and had worked through knowing she had a learning disability, you know, since she was very young, and knowing that she learned differently and needed accommodations. And it was just interesting to see her approach as she entered college compared to his approach as he entered college and dealt with accommodations, and the process. So I've kind of been able to see it from both sides. A lot of people ask about that when students do have 504 plans. We've been asked that as well, and they can also receive the same kinds of accommodations as students with IEPs. And it's not actually any different, interestingly. But both of them did go on to college, and both of them had accommodations in college. My son started at Nova and then transferred to George Mason. And my daughter, she actually started at Mary Washington and then transferred to George Mason and went through the process of getting accommodations. So I know that's a big topic on a lot of people's minds, how that works. And it's very interesting because it's not quite the way you think it works, and the way we as employment transition representatives are often told it works. So it was very eye-opening when I went through the process with my own children. Um, a lot of times families really want their children, for instance, tested by the school system in maybe their senior year of high school or their junior year of high school. And the school system, the teams are often reluctant to do that. Um, the colleges are very often don't want to take that testing. They really want testing done on an adult scale, which the school system does not do. So for instance, my daughter I had to have her retested, even though, you know, I knew the ropes. So she was tested in high school before she left high school. We had very recent testing. She still had to be retested on adult scales to be able to get her accommodations in college. That was one interesting thing that came up. Um, you know, so it's funny that a lot of things that, you know, we as ETRs and school staff understood to be true were not always the case. The flexibility, for instance, Nova was amazingly flexible. Their accommodations, their staff, the way they worked with my son, the way most of the teachers did. Um, George Mason, not quite so much. So it was very eye-opening experience to be able to share with students as they're coming up and making that transition. So anyone who has students who are planning to go on to Nova or four-year university or hoping to transfer, feel free to ask questions about that. As I said, my daughter's getting ready to graduate and apply to grad school to be a school psychologist. Um, my son, God love him, made it to senior year at Mason and decided he would rather work. So that was great. But, you know, they all have to have their own path, don't they? So, you know, sometimes we push them and then they make their own decision. And that's also part of being a parent. You have to know when to let them pursue their own path as well. So I look forward to answering any questions you have about Nova, George Mason, and those kinds of things.
Thank you so much, Linnell.
No problem.
So at this time, we are going to open it up for questions from the audience. And we want to encourage you, if you feel comfortable, you are welcome to raise your hand. If you want to ask your question verbally, we will enable your microphone and camera. Or if you would rather, you can also type some questions in the chat. I see we already have a few questions here. You may have already answered this one, so please forgive me. We have a question. Did you have to retest your son in order to get the accommodations in college?
So in my son's situation, he had a 504 plan for ADHD and mental health. So he was able to get his doctor to sign off on the diagnosis and submit his testing, which was pretty recent, and they accepted that. Nova did require him to resubmit an updated letter, though. I can't remember if it was after 1 year or if it was, I feel like it was after just 1 year. The next year he had to resubmit an updated letter, but in his case, it was a letter was enough. But since my daughter has dyslexia, she had to be retested. And since I had opened a DARS case for her, it was so funny. I was like thinking, okay, all right, we'll call the insurance. And then all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, you have a DARS case. Email your DARS counselor, tell her you need updated testing, because if you have a DARS case open, DARS can provide that for free. So she had an amazing neuropsych done by a doctor. She was referred to by her DARS counselor at no cost to her or me, which was amazing. And it was very thorough, which was great. So that was awesome.
It's wonderful. Thank you. We have a question here. What kind of diploma will the students with disabilities get when they graduate from college?
If you're going to a regular at Nova, if you complete a 2-year degree, you would receive an associate's degree. And at Mason, if you are accepted, you receive a bachelor. But if you have the type of disability where you would go into a specialized program like the George Mason Life program that I think Ms. Bass mentioned in the last session, then I think you just get a certificate that you've completed this special life skills program. But if you enter a fully fledged bachelor degree, you get the same diploma as anyone else. In fact, you don't have to tell a college you have a disability unless you need accommodations if you're going to a regular college. That's up to your student.
Thank you so much. The next question I see is, how did you determine that college was right for your child? My son had several disabilities, and we are trying to figure out if post-secondary education involves college or other type of training.
To be honest, I didn't feel like my son probably should have started college right away, because he, disabilities, even like ADD, ADHD, mental health, even learning disabilities are developmental in nature and can not just affect that specific thing like their learning or their attention. It can also affect their overall social development, their decision making, and all of those pieces. And boys tend to sometimes mature a little slower than girls too. So he probably would have benefited more from waiting, maybe doing something else first. But, it's tough because for me, as my parenting is letting, to some extent my kids make choices with my advice. They might make the wrong choice, and I feel like I have to let them do that to some extent. So, that's where I come from. Everybody has their own their own way. My daughter started out as a biology major. I did not think that was the right way for her to go, but I wasn't going to say, you cannot do that, you know. I think she ended up in the right place, you know, and I wouldn't want to tell her that, because I wouldn't want her to, you know, be ashamed to come back and say, "Ugh, I couldn't do biology, it was too hard." But it turned out that that wasn't the right fit for her. So she ended up switching, and now she wants to be a school psychologist, which I think is a great fit. So, you know, I feel like it's, for me, it's important when you have students that are more participating in the general ed setting, that are going to be independent in the future. You know, I'm not talking about, you know, your child who you're going to have to continue making decisions for so much, as ones who will be making independent decisions, you know, allowing them to make those mistakes where you can, you know, give them to say, hey, this is my advice, but this is your decision, and then go from there.
Thank you so much. And I see Ursula and Christopher. Would you like to help answer the question or add anything? Please feel free.
Yeah, it's definitely, you know, I have to say that it's a really tough decision to make for your child. It's really hard to sit down and look at a 9th grade or 10th grade child, and as parents have the conversation of, well, we really at this point have figured out that college is not the path. And that can be difficult if you're, you know, you kind of have expectations or ideas. We come from pretty educated families, so that was sort of the course of what you do after high school. You go to college. And I will say that the different workshops and transition programs that are offered have done a really nice job over the years of really explaining this idea that making that decision and helping your child make the choice about what the best post-secondary option is has to do primarily with what their end goal is. So if going to a 4-year college program or a 2-year college program or a gap year or a vocational training program is going to best prepare them for what they want as an adult, then that's how you make the choice. And again, we as parents, we've given ourselves permission to change our minds because we want Nico to know that he is also allowed to change his mind. But it is interesting, and Nico is our first child. He has a younger brother as well. But when you have to make those decisions kind of earlier on in order to move the transition process forward while they're younger in high school, it can be a little bit of a gut punch, to be brutally honest. But what has been amazing is figuring out all of these other incredible post-secondary opportunities that we now know will best serve Nico as he becomes a productive and happy member of society, doing a job that he really wants to do. I'll get off my soapbox now.
Can I add one more thing? That's so beautiful what you just said. And you know, letting go of your expectations or your hopes and dreams sometimes is really important, and letting the process be centered on, you know, the individual, the young adults' hopes and dreams and desires and needs and abilities and strengths is really important. You know, for my son, he started really struggling in 11th grade. So you can imagine the kinds of expectations that had been on him up through 11th grade, and the mindset that had to really change to adjust to the new reality of what was going on in his life. So it's important to focus on what's important here, and that shouldn't be the parents' expectations or the parents' hopes. Well, I always thought you'd go to UVA. Well, you know, I always thought my kid would do XYZ. you know, kids aren't like that, are they? They don't do what we always thought they would. You know, they all have their own paths. So just kind of keeping that in mind.
Thank you both. It's really very well said. Other questions from our audience? You may either raise your hand or type in the chat if you're more comfortable.
I'll just say someone had just put in the chat to us privately just a question about, which I think everybody can see, I'm not sure, but a question about what kind of sort of more creative job opportunities or potentials that we've discussed with Nico and that he's kind of gravitated towards. And so I just wanted to share the things that we talked about with Nico would be, so again, his words are, quote, "I want to help animals, but I'm not so sure about actually being the person to handle the animals. I want to help teach others about how important animals and the environment are and that we need to take care of them," which again, like we said, is very different from being a vet. So things that we had him explore and we've talked about and kind of visited, right, are pet stores, pet food stores, zoo facilities. So like he may not be taking care of an animal per se, but he could be helping prepare the food and vitamins for animals. Working at a park visitor center, wildlife reserve or center, museum exhibits, helping with the educational outreach or field trips at a park. Here in the DC area, we have a lot of nonprofit conservation organizations and environmental groups, so office jobs there. A lot of federal job possibilities, Office of Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Department of Agriculture, EPA, etc. So just really cast that net incredibly wide and let your kiddos explore what might be interesting for them.
Thank you very much. I have a question, and either Linnell or Ursula, please feel free to answer. But what would you tell a parent who thinks maybe it's too early to start transition planning? How would you respond to that?
I'd be happy to weigh in. I don't. It's never too early to start. Like I said earlier, a lot of it, just the early planning is just getting a sense of context and perspective. It doesn't mean that when they're 10 years old you have to start worrying about what to do. But it's helpful to go to these things and start being aware as to what options may be available. Like I said, you don't do anything with them. You just keep them in the back of your mind. Another thing, start a folder. Start a binder. Each year you go to one of these things, collect the information you have, and stick it in a binder. And we've got one for every year here on the shelf. They become resources that you will use later. So even if you're starting early, you're not going to use it early, but you'll use it later.
Very good point. Thank you so much. I see another question here. I think it's for Linnell. It says, how often did Miss Palencia's daughter need to be tested for college?
She only needed to be tested one time. So it depends on the school. Sometimes usually one set of testing should be okay for the 4 years. But sometimes they may want an update, they may want an updated letter. But if the child finishes within 4 years, you run into the issue of needing more testing a lot of times, because a lot of our kiddos take more than I'm finger quoting if I had my camera on, more than the traditional amount of time, which I don't even think counts anymore anyway. For instance, I'm pretty sure it was the reason at Nova. My son needed more information because I think he was there more than 2 years. So I think that's where you run into if you're at, for instance, Nova more than 2 years. I think they want something updated. And I think if you're at a 4-year university more than 4 years, I think they ask for something updated, is probably what the rule of thumb is. So many of our kids are going to need more than that amount of time. Even a mild learning disability will often require maybe 1 extra year to get through it, or 2 extra years. So it's crazy, but unfortunately that's the case. But if they don't have a DARS case, or they don't qualify, or it's not really needed, a lot of times you can go through your insurance. Like with my son originally, when I had him tested privately, the first time we went through insurance, so it did still have a cost involved, but it wasn't thousands of dollars. So you can always consider that, too. If you do need to pay out of pocket for testing, call your insurance first.
Thank you, Linnell. And Ursula and Christopher, please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback a little bit on both what Chris said and Linnell. So first about the when do you start? And this also, I had seen someone in the chat had written about what resources to use. There's a lot there. One of the most helpful resources are those checklists that are in the toolkit, and also the ARC puts out some checklists and sort of steps. Yeah, they have the top 10 things you can do to plan for transition. The toolkit, they have a list of suggested transition activities. One of them has, like I said before, sort of the list of life skills or independent skills that students should kind of have at the end of each grade level. Those are really helpful because, it's a list. They're pretty objective. Again, you have to think about your child and your family and what the needs are. So there could be something on a list for 1 year that you look at it and go, forget it. There's no way that's happening in our family universe this year. But there might be something, on a list 2 years down the road that your kiddo wants to do. So those are helpful. And in terms of college, whether students are going to be transitioning into an academic program or any other kind of post-secondary opportunity, it's important, as much as they are able to be able to name and describe their disability, but more importantly, for them to be able to convey to somebody else, what does that mean in terms of what they either need in a classroom, and I'm sure that was discussed in the session before this, but also then what does that mean in the workforce for them? So if a student knows, I have an auditory processing deficit, this is what that means. When you talk to me and give me directions out loud, I don't get most of it. So I really need to see directions written down, right? So that being able to describe what they need is important no matter what they end up doing after high school.
And I think that's where some of the I'm determined tools also help them identify and communicate those in a way that they can.
Yeah, and it's it can be some really super uncomfortable conversations, and again, you need to know your family and your child. If they're ready to talk about their disability in 3rd grade, that's fantastic. If they're not really ready until 10th grade, 11th grade, that's okay too. But at some point, in order for them to advocate for themselves and what they need, they have to be able to communicate how they best learn and work and get through life.
And what you're saying is so important. I've often talked to my daughter about how she would have felt if she didn't know early on that she had a learning disability, because she's very bright, but she couldn't learn to read. She's a typical dyslexic individual. And you know, we've had conversations about this, how she would have felt and how her whole persona would have been different if she didn't know she had a learning disability from a young age. So it is important, you know, to understand those things, because it's just part of understanding yourself and how we're all different and we all have our strengths and weaknesses. And, you know, when I talk to students, particularly speaking of students with more the category A types of disabilities, that those are the kinds of things that are learning differences where your weaknesses are things that make it hard for you to be amazing in the classroom. You know, that's where the kind of those category A disabilities tend to come in. You know, that doesn't mean that you might not have amazing strengths in areas that are outside of the classroom. So, you know, it is really important to understand your strengths and weaknesses. And, you know, when you're talking about students with the more maybe complex disabilities, then you're talking about really that identifying, you know, those areas where these are the things I can do, instead of always focusing on what are those things that are hard for me. What are those things I can do? Everybody can do many things. So it is important to be able to identify those things. And if you as a family maybe are having a hard time with that, you know, talk to your school staff, talk to your child's case manager, you know, to help you with coming up with those things, even in a simple way, to start working toward that. Because I know myself and other people in my job in all the high schools, we do come across many students in the high school who say, wait, what? I have a disability? Or I don't know what my disability is, or I know I have blah, 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 but I don't know what that means. And these are individuals that are, you know, young adults or close to being that. So it is important.
Thank you so much. I see, I think Mr. Castellano noted another question in the chat. I'm not sure if this was answered before or not. Ursula, you may have mentioned some resources, but if any of you can think of any additional resources that you have found the most helpful, curious what you have found the most valuable. I see someone just put top 10 things you can do to, yeah, that is an excellent one. Top 10 things you can do to plan for transition, the toolkit. Feel free to jump in if there's any others.
Oh, I forgot one of the most important resources.
Okay.
Try to find, this is for parents, it's like a resource that is helpful on so many levels. Try to find a parent of a student who's 1 or 2 years ahead of your own child, who is going through it kind of in the same cadence as your child, but just a little bit earlier. It's really helpful also, you know, to talk to someone who their kiddo went through it 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but things change quite quickly, you know, as we all know, 2020. But, you know, it's sort of it's kind of like having a partner, not necessarily to hold your hand, but or shoulder to cry on, but definitely someone who maybe is talking to the same ETR, talking to the same people in the county, or the same folks in different transition programs. That is definitely a super helpful resource. We have two families, and we glom onto them a lot.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. Thank you. Absolutely.
And don't be afraid to, you know, when you need, sometimes when I would need to convey something to one of my kids who attended the high school I worked at, sometimes I would talk to school staff to talk to them about it. So it wasn't always coming from their mother. Some things are better heard from someone who's not their mother, um, regarding things relating to, you know, school and, you know, things like that. So don't be afraid to talk to school staff, you know, and you know, depending on your child's level and what their goals are, you know, I've talked to families who had students working on independent living skills, things at home, that I've come back, you know, in school and talked to the child or young person about an independent living skill issue in their home. You know, I've talked to them about that at school, and sometimes even made it homework. You know, you need to be doing this at home, you know, and talked about having that as a homework assignment, or, you know, so don't be afraid to talk to your student's case manager. If they're in high school, their, you know, WAT teacher, their ETR, about things that maybe need to be addressed that sometimes could be better being reinforced or mentioned by someone other than a parent, or in addition to a parent too.
Thank you so much, both of you. I see Ursula and Christopher also mentioned workshops through the Parent Resource Center. Those are awesome. And someone did mention the ARC earlier in the chat. The ARC does have some parent support groups, I believe, if you haven't checked them out yet. Any more questions that we have not answered? I see Mr. Castellano just said, what's one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you started?
The one, I mean, I knew a decent amount because I had been working in special education before I had kids, except I would say that once I did have kids, I did feel badly that sometimes I gave not the best advice to families before I had my own kids and understood better what it felt to be in those shoes. So I would say, you know, I wish I'd had that experience the whole time. I used to joke when my son was young that some of his antics were punishment for silly things I told families when I was a 22-year-old brand new teacher. But in all seriousness, you know, when my son began having mental health issues, just really understanding right away that everything else has to take a back seat to that. When there's those kinds of issues, whether they're health or mental health, if school has to be a second priority, if school has to be put off for a year, whatever it is, those things have to be your priority at that moment. And that is, you know, something that it's better to accept and move forward than, you know, spend all your mental energy worrying over those kinds of things.
Thank you, Linnell. I know that many of us who are parents can definitely relate to that. Ursula and Chris, if you have anything to add, please feel free.
I think one thing is, you know, in the moment of these things, as you're dealing with a particular issue or problem, it seems like that's your whole world and everything needs to be solved right at once. And it doesn't. I guess the one thing, you know, what did you wish you know? Breathe a little. You know, nothing needs to be handled right away. Mm-hmm. This is a process and it takes time. Just understand and respect that fact that it takes time and that you don't need to sweat the small stuff in a way.
Yeah.
What would you add?
Yeah, I would agree. I used to, I kind of have a joke with other families when I get calls or emails saying, oh, we have a, you know, 4-year-old who was just diagnosed. Somebody gave us your email. You know, what's your first piece of advice? And I jokingly say, you need to have, I won't call, well, you need to have a moment to grieve for the loss of a normal child, which is a really fancy way of saying, like, cry yourself to sleep one night about how you wish you could change the world for your child, but you wouldn't change your child for the world because you love them. But you still got to get up the next morning and, like, help them brush their teeth and make breakfast and do whatever. So I just say, like, one of the amazing things about having a child with a disability is that it's a little bit of a secret club. You get to revel in the small, the small, what am I trying to say?
Small accomplishments.
Thank you. The small accomplishments. You know, it's like, it's great if Jimmy across the street started reading when they were 4, but you can go ahead and throw a parade for your family when your child learns to read at age 10. You know, celebrate those milestones because they're so important for your child. And that should be for any parent, but, you know, give yourself permission to take a breath and be really happy when they remember to pack their backpack one time in a month, you know, whatever it is. Or, you know, if they didn't get into that one elective that you really wanted them to get into to keep the pace so that they would get a CTE credit for something, you'll figure out another way. So that's what, if, you know, if I could sit with myself 7 years ago, that's probably what I would say.
Thank you so very much. I do see one other question here. I'm not sure if anyone on the panel can answer it or if any of our other moderators would have any information, but there's a question. Do you know where my son can get the vaccine, student 18 with a disability? Does anyone have any information regarding that?
I don't, but I would certainly, I guess, if you have a family doctor, I would reach out to him or her first, and if not, I would go onto the county's health department website and look to see if you're able to schedule some. Might be easier sometimes to call. You could get their number, but if through your personal doctor you're unable to get lucky, then I would try the Fairfax County Health Department website.
I know some people have some, I have some students with serious disabilities that have already exited the school system. They're in their early 20s who have gotten the vaccine. So I know young people with serious disabilities are getting it, but I think they're just registering with the health department. So I would call the health department.
Thank you, Mr. Castellano and Linnell. That's really helpful. Well, if there are no more questions, I just want to say thank you again to our panel members. You have been tremendous in sharing your wisdom and your knowledge with families that may be brand new to this process. So with that, I will hand it over to Mr. Castellano.
Thank you, Ms. Contreras and Sharon Denisar. Thank particularly Linnell, who I know and love and worked with for many years, and the Peches. Thank you so much for this. The information that you shared, it was just, I mean, it wasn't just so helpful, but it was so smart and so simple. And I think, I know personally that's something that you know, just Mr. Peche, when you were saying, just stop, take a breath. You don't have to solve everything right now. That's obvious, but it's easy. It's so easy to forget. And I just thank you. There were just so many, I can't go through it, but there were so many things I heard tonight. I was like, oh my gosh, oh, that makes so much sense. Oh, that's brilliant. So we've had amazing presentations since Monday. But this is exactly why I love the parent panels, where they're always my personal favorites. I just, yeah, I'm just overwhelmed right now, and I can't thank you enough. So just a quick friendly reminder, Trevor Christensen put the link in the chat. If you click on that, it'll take you to a short form allowing us to collect feedback on the session you just heard. Again, please complete the survey so we can get your feedback and continue to make our events even better. And finally, we hope everyone will join us tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, we're going to learn about guardianship, supported decision-making, and we're going to hear from our second parent panel. The guardianship and supported decision-making is going to be presented by the ARC of Northern Virginia. I know some of you know them very well, and some of you have heard about them but may not know who they are. So please tune in tomorrow at 6:30 for our last night. Again, thank you, and we hope that you have a terrific night. Good night.